Hello, thank you again for joining us. My name is Mary Darcia, and I'm here again with Dr. Darcia Narvaez. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
So today we're going to be talking about your theory, which is Triune ethics meta theory. So Dr. Narvaez, could you tell us a little bit about this theory?
Yeah, let me tell you first about how I came, or the ingredients that come together in the theory.
Yes.
And it seems to me we have to create theories that are cross-cutting, interdisciplinary, disciplinary now, especially in psychology, for trying to solve problems and figure out who we are as human beings, where we should be going, and so on. So the criteria that I use in Triune ethics meta theory, I call it a meta theory now. We're talking about my book from 2014 called Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom. And in there, I didn't say meta theory, I just called it theory, but it's really a meta theory.
Absolutely.
And so it integrates information of various kinds. So it's got evolutionary roots in how our brain evolved and how it functions. So it's got neurobiological evidence that's rooted really in neuroendocrine and emotion systems primarily, but also the kind of the functioning of the whole body. And it describes optimal and suboptimal functioning at the neurobiological level. Discusses adaptive function, why the things that are in the theory work, why people act a certain way. It's because it helps them adapt to their own living circumstances. So it's that we call it now functional adaptation, not evolutionary adaptation, which is a different thing. That means your ancestors or your descendants outcompete their rivals, and that's natural selection. But Triune ethics meta theory would say that if you have a suboptimal set of neurobiological developmental pieces, you are actually going to be less evolutionarily adaptive. But we're not really talking about that. So anyway, and then other information that's integrated is clinical evidence from what happens, what people, how their functioning works when things don't go right.
Sure.
In early life in particular. And then the cultural evidence, we look at cultures where the evolved nest, for example, which supports optimal moral development and optimal ethics. We look at the cultures that provide the evolved nest because they are providing what our species evolved to need to grow optimally. And their morality looks quite different from places that don't provide the nest, where you then develop suboptimally, essentially.
Yeah, so these are, just to review, kind of bring this all together. These were criteria that you used to help formulate the Triune ethics meta theory, which has been driving your research now for several years. And so you're using criteria from across disciplines and really integrating all of that. So it's not that you just came up with this theory on a whim or based upon some specific concern, but you're really trying to integrate across multiple disciplines. And you are doing that by using some important criteria.
That's right. Yes. So now we can just review quickly why is it called Triune?
Absolutely.
And that's because it's based in part on Paul MacLean's Triune brain theory, which is useful for considering the global mindsets we can get into based on what's happening, our reactions at multiple levels, and that guide our behavior. So one set is called the safety or security ethic, or self-protectionism. And that's rooted in what we're born with, these survival systems, which we've discussed before. And when they take over your mind because you're scared to death or anxious or angry, they filter everything for you. Your perception, what you see as possible actions you can take, your processing of information, your mobilization for action, all that's affected by the mindset you're in. And so when you're in a survival mode, a self-protectionist mode, you're really not going to be open-hearted or open-minded because that's just not the way the neurobiological structures are functioning at that moment.
Yes, and your theory is emphasizing that it's the lower part, the lower brainstem, that's being really activated during that time, right? And that's how you're integrating the neurobiology neurobiological aspect. So we've all experienced those feelings before or have been in that mindset before. But I think it is really helpful that when you're in that mindset to have that awareness, okay, this part of my brain is being activated at the moment.
Right. And so to learn to move away from being dominated by that orientation, it helps to step back, which you can learn through meditative practices and all, to learn to kind of notice these things, these feelings that come and go, these kind of selves or mindsets that come and go, and to then not be caught up in them. To learn to divorce or to detach from those panic or anxiety driven mindsets, so that you can actually be more socially attuned to others and more cooperative and collaborative.
So it's really when we're having those experiences of the brain stem, the lower limbic system being really activated, we're in that safety ethic. And then once we're able to be aware of that, we're able to then shift, as you say, to a different mindset or to be using a different part of our brain, right?
Yes, right. And so the second kind of ethic or mindset that I discuss, I call the engagement ethic, which is the relationally attuned, other-oriented. It's not like you lose yourself completely, but you are open and you're ready to collaborate or cooperate with the other because you're not panicking. You're not caught up in your own sense of, anxiety and distress and worried about vanishing or just being destroyed in some fashion, because that's really deeply what's happened is in that if you have a disposition for that, you've been conditioned to actually go into that panic mode easily. And it changes the blood flow and what systems are operating and what genes are being expressed at that moment.
Right.
And so we want to have that evolved nest providing the nourishment that the neurobiological systems that are developing in early childhood need, so that you are developing those relational attunement capacities, which rely on a well-functioning vagal tone or vagus nerve, well-functioning neurotransmitter systems, and so on. All sorts of systems are shaped in that early life, and then they guide you for the rest of your life unless something else happens.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, I think we all can relate to that, having those experiences where there is relational attunement or there is not relational attunement, where you're speaking and maybe the other person is so panicked they're not able to engage with you about something, or maybe you're on the other side of that conversation and it's just difficult to relate or to engage. So I think that's really helpful, putting those two next to each other, help us see the difference between them, and how understanding that there are differences between the safety ethic and the engagement ethic, how the differences between those can help us foster better communication, right, and problem solving.
Yes, right, and getting along with others
Right.
in positive ways.
Yes. And then there's a third, right?
Yes. Yeah, the third kind of global mindset that we could get into is rooted in one or the other of these basic systems. So our self-protectionist system, if we that's the emotions that can drive what we call now the imagination ethic, or the engagement orientation, the love and playfulness with others, that can also drive what I call the engagement ethic. So the engagement ethic is able to, it's rooted in our abstract thinking, our ability to think outside the present moment. So it's about imagination. And so the protectionism, the safety ethic we've been talking about, the engagement ethic, these are face-to-face kind of orientations.
I see.
The imagination ethic then builds on one of those, one or the other, and then enables us to abstract and plan and think ahead and outside the present moment. It can be fueled then either by self-protectionism. Oh, how can I dominate this person? Or how can I, escape this person, or this situation in the future, or that kind of thing. Or if that's the protectionist orientation, or the engagement ethic is about, when it's rooted, partnered with imagination, is a communal imagination. So it's how do we get along together in the future? How are we
it's beyond just you and I, right?
Yes.
It's you and I together and something else beyond that.
Right. So the safety relational protection orientation it's about me and my stuff and me and mine, right? The engagement relational attunement orientation it's about being with you. It's much more, relational. And then the imagination ethic builds on one or the other, but it's about more than me and you. Now, that can be either in a relational positive way or this kind of protective us against them kind of way.
Right. So both of those feed into the imagination, what type of imagination that you're carrying into your daily life, in your relationships or workplace or that kind of thing. Right. Yeah, that's very interesting how they're all connected and build upon one another.
Right. So there's layers and layers. And there's many ways to be, many selves here. And I've just identified 3 basic kind of overarching categories to use. So the self-protectionist kinds of things, the relational attunement kinds of mindsets or ways of being, and then the imaginative, abstracting kinds of ways of being. And so there's lots. The Buddhists have, I don't know, dozens of selves, and they divide them much more finely than what I'm talking about. But some of them we could talk about here.
Sure.
So in terms of the relational self-protection, it's really a hardened heart or an absent heart. That means your emotions have either shut down, you're guarding yourself, you're bunkering yourself, or you actually are just iced up. So in the face-to-face moment, you're going to be reactive and seek dominance in the moment. So you show that you're a little smarter than that person, a little cuter than that person, a little something more than that other person you're with. That's the controlling type of reaction, because that worked in babyhood, to be dominant, you were encouraged somehow to show dominance, and then you got your needs met. Or you can withdraw and dissociate. Perhaps you were left to cry extensively and just gave up after a while. Then you learn to just not feel, not be in your body, not emote, not even pay attention to your emotions and shut them down. And so you can just be compliant in your morality, a kind of vacancy, really. And if this gets into the more group orientation, you can get into a mob morality.
I was just about to ask that, how this relates to group. But I think that's really helpful to have those almost like flags of letting us know when we're in one of these ethics or not. So that's very helpful to have a concrete, question that we're asking. It's all about me, it's mine. And then also, do you have a hardened heart or an absent heart? Yeah, that's very helpful.
So, yeah. And this kind of face-to-face self-protectionism is about either pushing people away or controlling them, right? It's so you're not comfortable being with people because you didn't develop all sorts of micro skills and various neurobiological systems that allow you to have that flexibility, flexible attunement with others. And so people go to therapy to learn how to build these things, right?
Yeah,
later on, if you're missing them.
Right, that's really helpful. And then with the engagement, you talk about it's all about you. And then if you could just take us through how that relates to also within a group and in terms of empathy too. We haven't talked about that, but how does that relate to empathy?
So the relational attunement is indicative of your ability to be empathic with the other. So it's showing that you are resonating with the emotions of the other and you're able to communicate them appropriately and signal back and forth. And so you're able to be
in attunement with the other one.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're so focused on yourself, but you're there, you're present emotionally.
And how does that relate to a group? So if you have a group experiencing this, right, there's isolation based on attraction, or you could explain us through that a little bit, what you mean by that companionship.
Yeah, so there's something this is our heritage, is to be attuned to others. Now you can get stuck in only your own in-group if you didn't have enough exposure to a variety, a diverse kind of set of relationships. Perhaps you only had your mother in early life instead of a community of caregivers, then you tend to be more focused in on and only comfortable with one kind of way of being, which is actually detrimental in a multicultural, diverse world, right? But helpful if you're only hanging around the same kind of people all the time. Then you have the capacity to be relationally attuned, but only within that small group. So nowadays, that's not very helpful.
It is not helpful, right? Especially living in the United States, a very diverse population. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then moving to imagination.
Yes. So if we go back to the relational protectionism, self-protectionism, safety, when that is fueled or enhanced, I should say, enhanced by imagination, then if you're in this kind of oppositional, controlling, dominating mode, you're going to be into righteous morality. You want to impose your way on others. You're going to, in a way, be angry and aggressive. Maybe you don't see it that way, and maybe it's really subtle, but you will want to, and you feel right about it, imposing your way of being on everyone else because it's the right one. So again, it shows the inability to be flexibly attuned and cooperative and, creating a new way of being with others. Because when we are with others, we have the opportunity to create a new culture between us. So almost a third culture. A third way of being. And that's the flexibleness that drove our species' success, is that sociality, the ability to get along with others. So if you get rigid and you get controlling, you're not flexibly attuned, you're not able to then create, co-construct a new society, a new way of being.
Right. And I think that as you're talking, I'm thinking about that really feeds into our understanding and perspective of justice, of what really is right. So if you're in the state of righteousness, right, as you're calling it, that does impact our perspective on what should be done, what can be done. Right.
And it's very Pharisees, Sadducees ways of being that Jesus criticized, right? Because they thought they were so righteous, following all the rules they thought were the most important, and they thought everyone else was, immoral.
So would you say it's kind of black and white, that type of thinking?
Yes. Again, it's the inflexible. Yes. So you latch onto a script, a set of rules, and then that's morality. And anybody who threatens that is... No, you got to get rid of them, get them out of the picture somehow. The other way of being inflexible with your imagination is to build on that detachment, dissociation that you learned and practiced in babyhood, to not feel your feelings. And this detached kind of imagination is I call it iced morality also. You don't have a sense of your relational connections or commitments or responsibility. And so then you can dream up anything, dream up weapons of mass destruction and have no sense of any responsibility for life that's destroyed based on what your actions are.
I see. Wow. And then in terms of, you also talk about wisdom, right? And how building upon the engagement ethic with imagination, you're able to integrate all of these in a more exponentiated way, I would say. Is that correct? Kind of trying to look at it in terms of the positive side, right? We've talked about the two negative sides in terms of imagination, but then what is the positive?
Yes. So when you have a well-functioning neurobiological structures and you've had a lot of practice growing up with social relationships and lots of support, you are able then as an adult to show a companionship morality where you're harmonious with others and you're able to let go of yourself and your ego and to actually be willing to give and receive and keep the flow of life going. And you become more communal and you collaborate with all human beings if we just focus on human beings.
Yeah, just one last question before you end. Is it hard? So if you have the right, the characteristics of the nest have been met in early life and you're developing and progressing, is wisdom difficult? Is it difficult to be flexible in the moment and to be able to receive and that kind of thing? Because it sounds lovely as you're talking about it, but I also imagine that some of our listeners might find that incredibly daunting or challenging.
Well, I think we have all sorts of, our culture has to support us in our wisdom. And if the culture keeps pressing you to be anxious and fearful of others that are different, or, think about yourself and getting more stuff, or people are out to get you in some fashion, and they keep activating your threat response, it's going to be hard to be wise. So it matters where you are, what situations you are, what you pay attention to. So you want to select environments, friendships, activities, books, websites that support
media and movies.
media, yes, that support a sense of connection, a sense of trust. And if you're immersed in kind of the opposite, it'll be harder to get to that wisdom. And so it is really important to go back to what we've talked about before, which is that cycle of competitive detachment, which unfortunately a culture can promote, where the adults are very distracted with all these other things, getting stuff, working, whatever it is. And then they don't provide the nest to the young and to each other. They don't provide social supports. And so they need to build people with degraded neurobiology, and then their wisdom is really hard to come by then. So we have to remember that our heritage is of cooperative companionship that's providing the nest to the young, creating and fostering then a neurobiology that's very flexibly attuned, creating adults then that have well-being and grow into wisdom. And it takes decades and decades to do that. And then they provide a society, keep a society going that provides a good cycle of growth and life.
Well, that is a wonderful piece of wisdom to end on as we hear. Thank you so much for explaining to us the Triune ethics meta theory and what the three ethics that it helps explain. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.